The judge didn't come to deliver good news. He came to deliver an ultimatum. Marry within 30 days or lose everything. 6 years of blood and sweat. 640 acres carved from nothing. All of it would be auctioned off to the highest bidder because some politician decided a man needed a wife to own his own land. Ethan Hale had built his ranch with his own 2 hands. He trusted no one. He needed no one. A lifetime of being abandoned had taught him that depending on others only led to heartbreak. But now the law was forcing him to find a bride. Enter Clara Whitfield, 26 years old, considered too old for marriage back east, too educated for most jobs, too poor to be independent. She didn't come looking for love. She came looking for land under her feet and a life that was finally hers. He offered her a business deal. She demanded to be treated as an equal. But what happens when a man who's terrified of needing anyone starts to need her more than he's ever needed anything? Real strength isn't carrying the weight alone. It's finding someone brave enough to share the load. This story proves that the walls we build to protect ourselves are often the very things that keep us from the life we deserve. Love isn't the risk. Fear is. If you've ever been scared to let someone in, drop a comment telling me what you're learning to trust. And if you want more stories about imperfect people choosing each other anyway, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Your support means everything. Ethan was 28, a man hardened by the land itself, and he knew the lawmen in the lead never brought good news. For 6 years, he had poured his life into turning this scrubland into a home, trusting only his own 2 hands. The lead rider, Judge Peaton, dismounted. He was a man who wielded the law like a weapon. Without any pleasantries, the judge stated his purpose. He said they needed to discuss the legal ownership of the Iron Creek Ranch. Every muscle in Ethan's body tensed. It was always about the ranch. He had filed every paper and paid every fee. But in the untamed Arizona territory, the law was a shifting beast. He told the judge to say what he came to say right there on the porch. The judge laid it out cold. A new law required owners of claims over 500 acres to have a family. A wife. Ethan's hands clenched. He had 30 days to marry, or his claim would be forfeited and the land auctioned off. It was insane. 6 years of his life, his sweat and blood, gone because of some distant politician's pen stroke. He told the judge this was his land, but the judge was unmoved. It was the law, foolish or not. Marry a woman you do not know, or watch your life's work get sold to the highest bidder. Those were his only choices. As they left, the judge's young clerk nervously mentioned an option. A woman named Clara Whitfield, 26 years old, had just arrived from Philadelphia. She was unmarried and looking for a new beginning. The judge warned him not to wait, as other men might see the same opportunity. Ethan was left alone, staring at the 640 acres he had built from nothing. His past in Texas had taught him that relying on others only led to heartbreak. People always left. The only thing you could count on was what you could hold in your own hands. But now the law was threatening to take even that. That night, he decided what he had to do. This arrangement did not have to be a real marriage. It only had to be legal. The next morning, he rode into the small town of Copper Springs and went directly to the boarding house. The owner, a sharp woman named Mrs. Henderson, opened the door. It was clear she already knew why he was there. In a town this small, news of the judge's visit had traveled fast. He asked to see Clara Whitfield. When she appeared in the doorway, she was not what he expected. She was tall, with a quiet strength about her. Her eyes, the color of sagebrush after a storm, met his without hesitation. There was nothing timid about this woman. He introduced himself, but she cut him short. She already knew who he was. With a calm voice that held a hint of the East, she invited him into the parlor to speak. It was clear from her confident manner that Clara Whitfield was not a woman to be taken lightly. Laced curtains and uncomfortable furniture. They sat in silence for a moment. Ethan finally spoke, saying he knew she understood the new settlement law. Clara simply said she did. Her hands were folded in her lap. He leaned forward and was direct. He had 30 days to find a wife, or he would lose his ranch. He explained this was not about romance, but a legal arrangement to satisfy the territory's requirements. Clara's expression was unreadable. She asked what she would get in return. The question caught him by surprise. He offered her a home and financial security in a house large enough for separate living spaces. He repeated that this was strictly business. Clara stated that business deals needed clear terms. She asked for his exact offer and what he expected from her. He replied that he was offering a home and security. In exchange, she would legally marry him and live at the ranch long enough to satisfy the law. After that, they could discuss the future. Clara pressed him about what would happen afterward. Her voice was calm but firm. She said she did not travel all the way from Philadelphia just to be a temporary solution to his problem. He asked her with some harshness why she had come. Clara looked at him steadily. She explained she had no future back east. She was considered a burden to her relatives. At 26, she was seen as too old for a good marriage, too educated for most jobs, and too poor to be independent. She came to the Arizona territory hoping that being an unmarried woman would not matter as much out west. Her honesty surprised him. He had expected excuses, not the plain truth. He told her quietly that people out here cared more about hard work than marital status. Clara replied that they had something in common. She listed her skills in managing a household, cooking, and handling records. She made it clear she would not accept an arrangement that treated her like a simple legal formality. Ethan reconsidered his approach. This woman was not desperate. She had pride and intelligence. He asked what she wanted. Clara said she wanted honesty and a clear understanding of the situation. She also wanted the ability to leave with enough money to start over if things did not work out. He agreed it was a business contract. He proposed a 1-week trial period at the ranch with no commitment. If she could stand the life and stand him, they would get married. If not, he would pay for her to travel anywhere she wanted to go. Clara thought about his offer, then nodded. She agreed to 1 week, but she had conditions. First, she required the separate bedrooms he mentioned. Second, she wanted to see the ranch's financial records. Third, she must be treated as a partner, not a housekeeper. The terms felt like a loss of control, but he would lose everything in 30 days if he refused. He stood and shook her hand, agreeing to everything. He would pick her up the next morning. Clara's firm handshake and calloused skin surprised him. As he rode home, Ethan felt unsettled. He had wanted a simple fix, but Clara Whitfield was an equal who demanded respect. This was going to be far more complicated than he had imagined. The next morning, Clara was ready with 2 bags and a trunk full of books. She was dressed practically for work, not for show. The ride to the ranch was mostly quiet. Ethan pointed out landmarks, and Clara observed everything with sharp attention. When they finally saw the ranch nestled in a valley, he watched her for a reaction. The main house was solid and large with a deep porch. The barn and other buildings stood behind it. It was not fancy, but it was the result of his hard work. He told her with pride that it was 640 acres with 300 cattle. The house had 4 rooms, and the well never ran dry. Clara remarked that it was larger and more isolated than she had expected. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. This did not seem to bother her. Inside, the main room was functional, with a stone fireplace and a long table. The kitchen had a cast-iron stove and basic supplies. Everything was clean but simple, built for function, not comfort. Ethan showed her to her room, a simple space with a bed, a washstand, and a window. While he brought in her trunk, Clara walked through the house, taking in every detail. When he returned, she was in the kitchen, studying the shelves. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Clara asked, her back still to him. He muttered, "I eat just fine." "That is not what I asked," she said, pulling down a near-empty flour sack and a can of beans. "Mr. Hale, this kitchen tells a story of 6 years of a man living alone. When did you last taste a fresh vegetable?" Ethan felt a defensive heat rise in him. "I am not starving." "No," she agreed. "But you are not exactly thriving either." She set the meager items on the counter. "If I'm to stay a week, I need to go to town for proper supplies." He started to argue, but she cut him off, finally turning to face him. "If I am to see if I can live here, I need to know what is possible, not just what you have settled for." He sighed, seeing no way out of it. "Fine. Make your list. We can go tomorrow." "Today would be better," she said plainly. And so just a few hours after he had arrived home, Ethan found himself headed right back to town, a woman with a purpose sitting beside him. At the general store, Clara moved with a quiet confidence, gathering flour, sugar, eggs, and potatoes. She spoke with the owner, Mr. Jacobson, about which vegetables were freshest. Ethan watched, a little stunned. "This is going to cost a pretty penny," he warned. Clara did not even look up from her list. "Food is an investment, Mr. Hale. A well-fed man works better." Jacobson, who had known Ethan for years, just grinned. "She has got you there, son. Maybe a woman's touch is what this ranch needs." That evening, the smell of roasted chicken filled the small house. Clara set a plate before him with real mashed potatoes and bread still warm from the oven. He ate without a word. It was the best meal he had tasted in 10 long years. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Clara just gave a small nod from across the table. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Ethan would rise before the sun to work the ranch, and Clara would rise an hour later. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized his chaotic kitchen, and even started clearing the old garden plot out back. She never complained about the heat or the hard work. She just did it. On the 4th evening, he walked in to find her at his table, with his private account book spread wide open. "Did I say you could look at those?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Clara looked up, completely unfazed. "You said I could see the financial records," she pointed to a page. "And these records are a mess. You are mixing your personal money with the ranch's, and it looks like you are losing money to carelessness, or maybe even theft." She showed him an entry for 200 pounds of feed. "By your own notes, you only used 120. Where did the rest of it go?" He leaned in, frowning. He had never noticed. "It could be someone is stealing from you," she said calmly. "Little bits here and there, salt licks, horse medicine. It adds up. I figure you have lost at least $80 in the last 6 months." $80. That was a month's wages for a ranch hand. "You figured that out this afternoon?" he asked, amazed. He should have been angry, but instead he pulled up a chair. "Show me." For 2 hours, she walked him through his own mistakes, explaining how to track everything properly. She was not condescending, just direct. When they finished, he asked the question before he could stop himself. "Will you teach me to do it properly?" Clara looked him straight in the eye. "That depends on if I'm still here after this week is over." He remembered the trial period. Her decision was just 3 days away. "What do you think so far?" he asked. She looked around the clean room. "I think you have built something worth saving. But I do not know if you want a partner, Mr. Hale, or if you just want someone to solve a legal problem." Clara's words hit a little too close to home. He'd only wanted a legal fix, but now she was changing his whole life, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. He admitted he'd been alone a long time. "So have I," she said. "But you are alone because you are afraid." She told him that his self-reliance was a fortress built from old pain. The truth of it stung. Ethan shot up from his chair. "I'm going to check the horses," he said, leaving before she could reply. Outside, under a brilliant starry sky, he tried to quiet the storm in his chest. She was right. A lifetime of disappointment had taught him that relying on anyone was a mistake. Or maybe it was not fear. Maybe it was just hard-won wisdom. When he returned, Clara's door was closed. For the first time in years, he was deeply aware he was not alone in the house. The next day, Clara asked to see the cattle. He saddled a steady mare for her, but she mounted the horse with a familiar ease that surprised him. "I have been riding since I was 6, she explained. Out in the south pasture, she silently watched the herd. After a good while, she spoke. "You are missing about 15 head." Ethan was stunned. "By my count, there are 283 here," she said. "You told me you had 300. Even if I am off by a few, you are still short." His own count had been right in the spring, which meant she was right. He was missing cattle. "Rustlers," he said, his voice grim. "Or maybe they just wandered off," Clara suggested. They rode the fence line, and it was Clara who found it, a section of wire that had been cleanly cut and repaired. "Someone has been here," she said. "And recently." Fury rose in Ethan. Someone was stealing from him. "It could be someone who knows your routine," Clara warned. "Someone who knows where you are and when." She looked him square in the eye. "You hire men for roundup. Do you trust them?" He wanted to say yes, but he honestly did not know. The loss of 15 cattle was a serious blow. That night, Clara set up a new system for tracking his livestock and inspecting the fences. "From now on, you check a different section every day," she instructed. "We will find their pattern." "We?" Ethan asked. She met his gaze. "If I agree to this marriage, this ranch's problems become my problems." This was the first time she'd spoken of staying so directly. "2 more days," he said. "Then we both decide," she corrected him. He realized she was right. It was his choice, too. He had to choose to trust, to share his life. As he lay in bed that night, Ethan finally admitted he did not want her to leave. He did not want her to go, because for the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home with her in it. The next day, he found her on the porch cleaning an old revolver she had found. "A rifle is fine for distance," she said, "but it is useless up close. I would rather have a sidearm if trouble comes to the house." She reassembled the Colt with practiced skill. "You know how to use that?" he asked. "My grandfather taught me that women should know how to defend their homes." He found a box of cartridges for her. Clara loaded the pistol, walked out to a fence post, and took aim. She fired 3 shots about 20 yards away, all hitting inside a 6-inch circle. "Your grandfather taught you well," he said, impressed. That evening, as the sun went down, they sat in a comfortable silence. Tomorrow was the day they had to decide. "I have been thinking about your offer," Clara said, "and I think your terms are not enough. If I am to be your wife, I need to be a true partner. I want my name on the deed as a co-owner, not just a wife." "It is a lot to ask," he said slowly. "It is a lot to give," she replied. "I would be tying my whole future to this land, and to you." "So, what are your terms?" Ethan finally asked on the last night. "If I say yes," she began, "then we go to town tomorrow, we file the deed paperwork, and we get married as the law requires." She paused, her gaze steady. "But understand this, Ethan. I will not be a wife in name only. We will be true partners. That means we share the decisions and we share the respect. This ranch will belong to both of us." He stared out at the land he had fought for, the place he built to prove he needed no one. He realized his own stubborn pride was the biggest threat to it all. "I need to think," he said. Clara nodded. "Take the night. I have to make my own decision, too. I need to decide if you are a man capable of a real partnership, or if you just want a cook who comes with a legal loophole." She left him alone with the sunset and his thoughts, wrestling with a future he never imagined. His life would be tied to someone who could leave him. But in only 6 days, she had already improved his home, his business, and his life. He found himself sleeping better and looking forward to their meals together. He realized that maybe being alone was not the same thing as being strong. Just before midnight, Ethan made his choice. He knocked on Clara's door. She was sitting in bed, still dressed as if she had been waiting for him. He said yes. He would agree to a true partnership with shared ownership on one condition. Clara closed her book and asked what the condition was. Ethan asked her to give him time. Time to learn how to not be alone. He admitted he would be bad at it, but he promised to try to be a real partner. He just needed her to be patient as he figured it out. A genuine smile finally touched her lips, transforming her face. "That," she said, "is the first honest thing you have said to me." She took a breath. "All right, Ethan. I will give you time to learn this land and become the partner this ranch needs." He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "We will go to town tomorrow and make it official." Clara reminded him they still had 23 days before the wedding, enough time to be certain. He reached out his hand. "Partners," he said. partners, she agreed. In that moment, Ethan began to think that maybe this forced arrangement could be a source of strength, not weakness. The next morning in Copper Springs, the air was already heavy with the promise of heat. They went to the Territorial Land Office, a cramped space that smelled of dust and old ink. The clerk, a tired man named Morrison, pushed the papers across the counter without a word. He had seen these kinds of desperate deals before. He confirmed they both understood the arrangement. She was gaining joint ownership, and he was giving up his sole claim. Ethan hesitated for just a heartbeat. He met Clara's gaze, then took the pen and signed his name. With a final stamp, the Iron Creek Ranch belonged to them both. Walking back into the sunlight, Clara folded her copy of the deed. "There is no going back now," she said softly. "No," he agreed. "No going back." Their last stop was to see Reverend Calloway and set the date, the 30th of the month, a simple ceremony with no fuss. The Reverend made a note. "I have married 17 couples out here," he told them. "Sometimes the most practical arrangements become something more." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. As they reached the property line, Clara asked him to stop the wagon. She climbed down and just stood there, looking out over the land that was now hers too. The wind whipped a loose braid across her face, but she paid it no mind. "My granddaddy used to say that land remembers," she said. "It remembers who poured their sweat into it, who loved it. You can't fool the dirt under your feet." Ethan stood beside her, looking out over the property that was now half hers. "What do you reckon this land remembers?" "It remembers 6 years of a stubborn man refusing to quit," she answered. "Now we'll see if it can remember what a partnership looks like. This whole arrangement was a gamble, a business deal signed on paper that meant nothing if they couldn't make it work." "I told you I'm going to be bad at this," Ethan said. "So will I," she admitted, "but they had to try. For the land." The first few days together set a new rhythm. It was a little awkward, but it worked. Claire moved through the house like she owned it, because she did, making small, smart changes. Ethan, who was used to answering to no one, found himself talking through his plans with her. When he rode out to check a fence line, he'd tell her where he was headed. When he needed to order supplies, he asked what she thought. Every conversation felt like giving up a piece of control, but Claire never threw her weight around. She asked questions and offered ideas. When they disagreed, she listened. It was a strange new feeling, this constant communication. Their first real argument blew up just 3 days in. Ethan had decided to hire on a couple of seasonal hands, Tom Fletcher and Jim Dawson. He'd already sent word to town for them to show up on Monday. "You hired Tom Fletcher," Claire said that evening, her voice quiet as she looked over the ranch accounts. Ethan nodded. "Good man. We need the help." Claire slid a ledger across the table. "Tom was here last spring," she said, pointing to a page. "And during that same time, feed and medical supplies went missing. The same things I told you were disappearing last week." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "You think Tom's a thief?" "I think the timing is mighty suspicious. He's worked for me for 3 seasons. I trust him." "You weren't tracking things close enough to notice if he was stealing," she said calmly. "I am not saying he is definitely a thief. I am just saying we should be sure before we invite him back." But Ethan heard it as a challenge to his judgment. "I know these men," he snapped. "Your judgment that missed $80 in losses." The truth in her words was a slap in the face. "I have run this ranch for 6 years without your help. This ranch belongs to both of us now," she replied, her eyes steady. "If he is stealing from me too. It has been 5 days, and you are already trying to run things," he shot back. "Do not make this about control when it is about common sense," she said, her own voice hardening. She picked up her books and walked to her room, closing the door softly. The quiet was worse than a slam. He knew she was right. The numbers in the ledger did not lie. He had been so focused on the big picture, he'd missed the thief right under his nose. The next morning, they rode out in a tense silence. Claire was the one who spotted it first. Another section of fence had been cut clean through, then repaired just enough to look right from a distance, just like the others. This was no drifter just looking for an easy score. This was someone who knew what they were doing, someone trying to hurt the ranch slowly. This was an inside job. And suddenly Ethan knew with a gut-deep certainty that Tom Fletcher was behind it. The fence was down. Someone had driven cattle right through and patched it up poorly. Tracks headed southeast into the rough country. "How many, you reckon?" Ethan asked. "At least 10 head," Clara said, studying the ground. 2 riders, maybe 3. Cold anger filled Ethan. This was no stranger. This was someone who knew his land. "We have to follow them," he said. Clara shook her head. "That is a job for the marshal. Going after them alone is a good way to get shot." Ethan hated to admit it, but she was right. "Fine," he sighed. "We will go to town." But first he steered his horse toward the old line shack on the edge of the property. The shack was unlocked, same as always. Inside, Ethan saw right away that a good knife, 2 coils of rope, and his wire cutters were gone. "Someone's been in here," he said softly. "Someone who knew where to look," Clara added. The truth hit Ethan like a punch. Tom Fletcher. He had worked the spring roundup and knew every inch of this place. Ethan sank onto a bench, the betrayal feeling heavy. "You tried to warn me," he told Clara. "I never enjoy being right about a thing like this," she said gently, sitting beside him. "I paid him a fair wage, and he was stealing from me all along." "You trusted him," Clara said. "That is not your fault. That is his." The kindness in her voice surprised him. He had expected her to be smug. Instead, she offered him comfort. "I am sorry," he said, "for last night. I should have listened." "I am sorry too," she replied. "We are both going to make mistakes. We just have to decide if we can forgive them." "I vote for forgiving," he said. They rode to town and told Marshal Davies, a lawman who had seen it all. Davies listened, promising to get a tracking party together. "Tom Fletcher, you say?" the marshal mused. "He has been on my mind before. I will see what I can find." That night, a comfortable silence settled between Ethan and Clara as they worked. They ate dinner and talked about how to make the ranch more secure. For the first time in 6 long years, Ethan did not feel like he was carrying the world on his own. Clara shouldered half the burden, and it made everything feel possible. Later, sitting on the porch, Clara spoke quietly. "My father died when I was 14, she began. My mother remarried a man who did not want me around. I learned early that you cannot always depend on family." Ethan listened as she explained her past. She had been a teacher, saving every penny to be independent, but her path was blocked. "So you came out here," he said. "I came here for freedom," she corrected. "A place of my own. I sure did not expect to become a rancher." "Do you regret it?" he asked. She looked at him, the sunset in her eyes. "Ask me again in a year, after we have survived a winter and our first real crisis. Then I will know." "Fair enough," Ethan agreed. As their wedding day grew closer, they fell into a rhythm. Clara started a garden while Ethan built a new chicken coop. They worked together, making the ranch a better place. 5 days later, Marshal Davies returned. He had found 9 of the stolen cattle down in a canyon, but the thieves were long gone. Tom Fletcher had disappeared completely, which was proof enough of his guilt. "We will keep an eye out," Davies promised, "but you best hire some reliable help." Finding good help was tough. Word of their marriage had spread through town, and the gossip was ugly. Ethan heard the whispers in the saloon, men making crude jokes about Clara. He had never cared about town talk, but now it made his blood boil. She deserved more respect. His anger must have been plain on his face. Clara saw him and led him out of the general store before he could start a fight. "Just let it go," she said. "It is just talk." "It matters to me," he said, surprising himself. Why did it matter so much? Because in just a few weeks, Clara had become more than a business partner. She had become someone he respected, someone he wanted to protect. He was mad enough to spit listening to the town's cheap talk. But Clara, she was steady. She just told him their own truth was all that mattered. The ride home was quiet, but his mind was loud. They had a deal, a partnership built on solid ground, but they still slept in separate rooms. He wondered if respect was enough to build a life on. As that thought crossed his mind, the sky turned a bruised purple. The summer storms had come back with a real mean streak. For 2 straight days, he rode through that downpour, making sure the herd was safe. Every evening, he'd walk in, soaked to the bone, and Clara would be there, a hot cup of coffee in her hands and dry clothes waiting by the fire. "Partners look out for each other," she said, not looking up from a pot of stew. "You keep our cattle safe. I'll keep you from catching your death." That night, the wind howled like a cornered animal, and through the racket he heard a soft knock on his bedroom door. Her room was flooding, a steady drip, drip, drip from the ceiling, soaking everything she owned. "You can't stay in here," he said, already grabbing a bucket. He told her plain and simple, "You're taking my room. I'll sleep on the sofa." She started to protest, but his mind was made up. As he turned to leave her in his warm, dry bed, she stopped him. "Thank you, Ethan, for the respect." He just nodded. "That's just common decency," he said quietly, before closing the door on the most complicated feeling he'd ever had. The morning sun washed the whole world clean. The roof, though, was a wreck. When he told Clara he'd need to ride into town for a week's worth of supplies, she didn't hesitate. "I'll come with you," she said. They spent the morning on that roof, working side by side like they'd been doing it for 20 years. He watched how she moved, sure-footed and confident. She wasn't just a woman he'd made a deal with. She was his equal right there beside him. "We're getting married in 4 days," he said over lunch. "And I feel like I barely know you." A small smile touched her lips. "Then ask." So he did. He learned her favorite book was one her uncle had forbidden. She learned he could play a rusty old harmonica. They shared small pieces of themselves over coffee and leftover cornbread. She wanted to be a doctor. He set his own arm once. With every story, the foundation under their feet felt a little more like solid rock. The evening before the wedding, they sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed all over the sky. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. He decided to tell her the God's honest truth. "Yeah, I'm afraid I won't be good enough for you." She reached over and her hand found his. "I'm afraid too," she whispered. "So we're both terrified," he said, a small grin on his face. "Good. At least we're in it together." In that moment, he knew the preacher's words tomorrow were just for show. They had already made the only promises that mattered, model. For the first time in 10 long years, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He was about to marry a woman he barely knew, not for love, but for survival. This is a story for anyone who has ever felt like they had to face the world alone. It is about how sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. The wedding itself was over in 15 minutes. It took place in the Reverend's small office with just 2 people as witnesses. Clara wore a simple gray dress she had sewn herself. When Ethan took her hand to say his vows, he was surprised to find he meant every word. This was more than just a deal. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, they skipped the kiss and just squeezed hands. Somehow that felt more real. At the boarding house, a few townspeople shared cake and coffee with them. An hour later, they were riding back to the ranch under the hot Texas sun. "Well," Clara said, breaking the silence, "we did it." "We sure did," Ethan replied. He looked at his new wife, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew things were different now. The promises they made were real and legal. Clara gently reminded him, "The marriage gives us security, but the partnership is what we make of it every day." Back at the ranch house, nothing had changed. Yet everything was different. That night at dinner, the air was thick with unspoken questions. They were husband and wife, but they still slept in separate rooms. "I have been thinking," Clara said, putting her fork down, "about the sleeping arrangements." Ethan's heart beat a little faster. "The leak in my room is fixed," she continued. "I should move back to my own space unless you would prefer otherwise." The question hung in the air. This was not part of their original agreement. "What would you prefer?" he asked, turning the question back to her. I asked you first, she said with a small smile. Ethan took a deep breath. The honest answer is, I do not know. Part of me thinks we should keep things simple with separate rooms. But another part of me remembers the storm. Knowing you were safe in my room felt right in a way I cannot explain. Clara's face softened. I felt the same way. Safe. I think our separate rooms have been more about fear than anything else. Fear of what? He asked. Of this becoming more than a practical arrangement, she admitted. I am not suggesting we rush into anything. I am just suggesting we stop acting like business partners who share a house. What does that look like? Ethan asked. Maybe we figure it out together, Clara said. We can admit we are both scared of caring too much and decide to be brave anyway. Ethan looked at her, seeing the strength and the vulnerability in her eyes. This woman had become essential to him. I care about you, he said quietly. And it scares the hell out of me. Everyone I have ever cared for has left. I am not going anywhere, Clara promised. This is my home now, too. I will fight for what we are building here. Can you promise the same? He took her offered hand. Yes, he said. I can promise that. Then let's stop sleeping like strangers, she said. Let's share a bed, even if all we do is sleep. Let's be honest that this stopped being just business a long time ago. A feeling of relief washed over Ethan. Okay, he said. That night they moved her things into his room. They were nervous, like teenagers on a first date. When she came to his door in her nightgown, he held the covers open for her. No pressure, he whispered. No expectations. They lay on opposite sides of the bed, aware of every breath in the quiet room. Thank you for making me feel safe enough to try this, Clara said into the darkness. Thank you for being brave enough to suggest it, he replied. He fell asleep to the sound of her breathing and slept better than he had in years. In the weeks that followed, a new routine formed. They worked together, ate together, and slept in the same bed. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams. The space between them and the bed slowly disappeared. One night he woke to find her curled up against him for warmth. He put his arm around her, and it felt right. The next morning they woke up tangled together, and neither of them said a word. The ranch started to thrive. They hired 2 new hands, Miguel and John, who were honest and hard-working. With their help, the fences were mended and the water systems were improved. Clara's smart planning made the ranch more efficient than ever. Ethan started asking for her advice on every big decision. You should hire another hand for the winter, she said one night, looking over the account books. We can afford it now. Ethan looked at his wife, his partner, and knew their gamble had paid off. They were building a real life together. You were right, Ethan finally said. We will not hire Tom. Instead, they decided to find better men. We will offer a warm bunkhouse, steady meals, and fair pay, Claire suggested. Security and respect go a long way. By November, they had 5 solid hands. The ranch was thriving, but their success drew unwanted attention. Other ranchers started talking, saying Claire had Ethan wrapped around her finger. When Ethan heard Ben Morrison making crude jokes about his wife in the saloon, something inside him snapped. Say that again, Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. I said your wife has got you on a leash, Morrison slurred. A woman comes in and takes over a man's ranch. Ethan's fist hit Morrison's jaw hard. My wife, Ethan growled, is a better rancher than you will ever be, and you will show her some respect. Marshal Davies broke up the fight before it got worse and sent Ethan home. He rode back to the ranch with bleeding knuckles. Clara was waiting on the porch. Ben Morrison had some opinions about our marriage, Ethan explained. You cannot punch everyone who talks about us, she said, though her touch was gentle as she cleaned his hand. It matters to me, he said, his voice low. It matters that they respect you. She looked up and met his eyes. Why? Because you are my wife, he said, the words feeling truer than he expected. "And what we are building here is real." She held his gaze. "Are we still pretending this is just a practical arrangement?" "We are not pretending anymore," he said. Clara's whole expression softened. "Good, because I stopped pretending weeks ago." She leaned in and met him halfway, their kiss feeling like a long overdue homecoming. When they pulled apart, he finally said the words, "I love you." "I love you too," Clara whispered. Their marriage, which had started as a simple legal necessity, became something real that night. Later, lying together in the dark, Ethan confessed his deepest fear. "I was so scared of this, of needing someone." "This is not weakness," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "This is the bravest thing we have ever done, choosing each other when it was safer to stay apart." "No going back now," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "Would not want to," she replied, her heart steady against his. But their peace did not last long. Word got around that Tom Fletcher and his gang of rustlers were in the territory again. "We need to increase our patrols," Clara said, studying a map of their land. They immediately started a new security plan. Ethan, Miguel, and John took turns riding the fence lines on night watch. The work was exhausting on top of their normal ranch duties. After 2 weeks with no trouble, they started to relax a little. That was when Fletcher decided to strike. On a moonless December night, Ethan was patrolling the eastern boundary when he heard it. Cattle moving in a hurry. He saw at least a dozen head being pushed toward a gap in the fence by 3 riders. He recognized Tom Fletcher's shape in the dark. "That is far enough," Ethan called out, his rifle raised. The only answer was a gunshot that zipped past his ear. He dove off his horse and fired back. Back at the ranch, Clara heard the gunshots and her blood ran cold. She grabbed her revolver, her hands steady, and ran for the barn. "Miguel! John! Ethan is out there alone." In record time, they were on horseback, riding recklessly toward the sound of the fight. She found him pinned down behind a rock, trading shots with the rustlers. Clara did not hesitate. She raised her revolver and fired at the ground in front of one of the riders' horses. The horse reared up, throwing the man clear off. Seeing they were outnumbered, the other 2 rustlers turned and fled into the night. Miguel quickly captured the man on the ground. Clara rode straight to Ethan, who was getting to his feet, covered in dust and bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. But he was alive. "I am fine," he said, holding her tight as she checked him over. "You should have stayed at the house where it is safe." Clara's fear instantly turned into fury. "Safe? While you are being shot at? Ethan, we are partners. I do not sit at home while you risk your life alone." "I can handle it," he started. "But you do not have to anymore," she cut him off. "You are not alone." He looked at this amazing woman who had charged into danger for him, and he finally understood. "You are right," he said quietly. "I am sorry." The captured rider soon revealed Fletcher's entire operation. Marshal Davies showed up at dawn to collect the prisoner. He told Ethan and Clara the captured man would surely talk. That would make this territory too hot for Fletcher and his gang. "Good riddance," Clara said, holding tight to Ethan. As the lawman rode off, they watched the sun come up. "I thought I was going to lose you," Clara whispered. "You were out there all alone." "I know," Ethan said, pulling her close. "I thought the same when I saw you riding toward the gunfire." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "We are partners in everything now, Ethan. The business, the danger, all of it. I will not be a wife who hides while you risk your life." "I am starting to understand that," he said. He always figured depending on someone else was a weakness. But last night, knowing Clara had his back, knowing he was not alone, did not make him weak. It made him stronger. "It made us stronger," she corrected him. They walked back to the house, hand in hand. That evening, watching the sunset, a truth hit him hard. For 6 years, he had fought to build Iron Creek Ranch. But last night, he was not just defending land or cattle. He was defending Clara. She was the one who rode into danger for him. Their partnership was what mattered. Their home was built on trust, not just timber. He had married to save the ranch, but somewhere along the way, Clara became the only thing worth saving. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked him softly. "That the judge was right," Ethan said. "He told me I needed to establish a family household. I thought that just meant signing some papers and putting a wife's name on a deed." He took her hand. But what it really meant was this: finding someone to build a life with, to share the good and the bad. Her eyes shined in the fading light. "Are you saying you are glad you were forced to marry me?" "I am saying I am grateful for whatever brought you to my porch that day," Ethan said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I am stubborn and you ride into gunfights, especially because of those things, you own my heart, Clara, completely." "Good," she said, smiling against his chest, "because you have mine too." Winter came to Iron Creek, covering the high desert in a thick blanket of white. The cold was brutal, but Clara knew just what to do. She had grown up with harsh Pennsylvania winters. She canned vegetables, stocked the pantry, and kept a warm fire burning day and night. The house became a haven against the biting wind. Ethan watched her, feeling a deep contentment he had never known. She moved with a quiet confidence that settled his soul. The long, dark evenings were no longer something to just get through. Instead, they became something to look forward to, a time of peace and comfort he had never expected to find. They would sit together after dinner, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just enjoying the quiet. But underneath all that peace, an old fear started to grow inside Ethan. The happiness he found with Clara, the love he felt for her, it all terrified a wounded part of him. He woke up beside her every morning and fell asleep holding her every night. And with each passing day, the fear got a little stronger. What if she left him? What if he was not good enough? He knew it did not make sense. Clara had proven her loyalty time and again, but old wounds from his childhood ran deeper than logic. He started pulling away just a little at a time. He spent more hours out on the range and made decisions without talking to her first. He was building a wall just in case. Of course, Clara noticed. "You have been quiet," she said one night, closing the account book. "Just tired," he answered. But it was not the whole truth. "Ethan," she said gently, "talk to me. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." "Do not shut me out," she insisted. "We promised to be honest with each other." He remembered that promise. Finally, he turned from the window, his voice low. "I am terrified, Clara. I am terrified every single day that I will wake up, and this will all be gone." The old fears began to creep back into Ethan's mind. He started pulling away, afraid that she would realize she deserved better and leave him, just like everyone else in his life had. "You are building a wall," Clara told him softly one night. "You are trying to protect yourself from a loss that has not even happened." "Everyone leaves eventually, Clara," he said, the bitterness heavy in his voice. "My father did. My mother did. Everyone." "Then let me be the first one who does not," she said, taking his hands in hers. "I know you're scared. I am scared too, but shutting me out only guarantees you will be alone. I am asking you to be afraid and choose me anyway. Choose us." Her words hit him hard. He was choosing loneliness because it felt safer, more familiar. "I do not know how to stop being afraid," he admitted in a quiet voice. "I am not asking you to stop being afraid," she replied. "I am asking you to choose us anyway. I cannot be the only one fighting for this marriage, Ethan." He knew she was right. "I will try," he promised her. And he truly did try. He fought the urge to create distance between them. But the fear was always there, whispering that this kind of happiness could never last. Then, February brought a storm that would put everything they had built to the ultimate test. Miguel, who knew the moods of this land, watched the sky with a worried expression. "A bad one is coming," he said, and they all knew he was not just talking about the weather. One afternoon, Miguel warned them a big storm was coming, the kind that kills cattle and buries buildings. For 2 days, they all worked non-stop, moving the herd to sheltered valleys and securing the barn. Clara organized the supplies inside the house. making sure they had enough to last for weeks. The storm hit with a terrible violence that shocked even Miguel. Wind screamed around the house, driving thick snow that made it impossible to see. For 3 days, the storm raged. The wind never stopped, and all they could do was wait it out together inside the ranch house. For 4 long days, the blizzard raged, trapping Ethan and Clara Hale inside their ranch house. When the wind finally gave up, the silence was deafening. Ethan opened the door to a world buried in white, with snow drifted up 10, even 12 feet. "I've got to check on the cattle," he said, his voice grim. But Clara stood her ground. "Ethan, it's a death trap out there. Another storm could be right behind this one. The herd has to wait." He shook his head, already pulling on his heavy coat. "They can't wait. If they're buried, every minute counts." He saw the frustration in her eyes. "This is my ranch, my problem to fix." "It's our ranch," she corrected, her voice sharp. "And I'm telling you, riding out there alone is a fool's errand." He finally offered a compromise. "I'll take Miguel." But it wasn't enough. Clara grabbed his arm, her voice pleading. "Please, Ethan, just one more day. Don't risk your life for this." He pulled away gently. "It's not a risk, it's the job." "I'll be back by sundown," he promised, walking out without another look. He couldn't bear to see the fear on her face because it confirmed what she'd been saying for weeks. He was shutting her out, choosing his old habits of handling things alone instead of leaning on their partnership. The truth was he was scared. Scared of how much he needed her. So he focused on the ranch, on the cattle, problems he knew how to solve. Out in the biting cold, he and Miguel found the herd had weathered the storm better than expected. A few losses, but nothing catastrophic. As the sun started to dip low, Miguel urged him back. "We need to head in, boss. The temperature is dropping fast." But Ethan pointed to a far pasture. "Just one more section." Miguel shook his head. "It's too dark and too cold. We need to go now." Ethan stubbornly replied, "You go on. I'll catch up." Miguel's face hardened. "I'm not leaving you out here alone. We're partners on this ride. We go together." The ranch hand's patience finally snapped. "Your wife is at home, worried sick, and you're out here freezing for cattle that'll be here tomorrow. What are you trying to prove, Ethan?" The question hit him like a physical blow. What was he proving? That he was tough enough to do it all himself? That needing Clara was a weakness? "Fine," Ethan mumbled, defeated. "We'll head back." But they had waited too long. A dangerous cold began to seep into his bones, a deep numbness that signaled trouble. He felt his body starting to give up. He tumbled from his horse, and the second time, he couldn't find the strength to get back up. "Go," he slurred to Miguel. "Get help." But Miguel was already there, trying to haul him to his feet. "Not leaving you. We go together, remember?" The world was turning white and quiet. It would be so easy to just close his eyes. Then he thought of Clara. He thought of her promise to always choose him. He thought of all the times he'd failed to choose her back, pushing her away out of stubborn pride. The thought of dying out here, frozen in a snowdrift because he was too afraid to depend on his own wife, was a bitter pill to swallow. "Clara," he whispered. "Tell Clara." But the darkness took him before he could finish. Back at the house, Clara stared out the window into the blackness. The sun had set an hour ago. "We have to find them," she announced to the other ranch hands. "Ma'am," one of the men said gently, "we'd just get lost ourselves out there." "Or they're already dead," she replied, her voice empty of emotion. "Saddle the horses. Bring lanterns. We're going." Her will was iron. She was going to find her husband. It was one of the hands who saw Miguel's horse first. 100 yards later, they found the 2 men. Miguel was barely conscious. Ethan was like a block of ice. Clara refused to panic. She gave sharp, clear orders. 2 men would get Miguel back to the house now. She would stay with Ethan. "Mrs. Hale, you should go with them," a hand protested. "I am not leaving my husband," she stated, and no one dared to argue again. As they left, she pulled Ethan close, trying to warm him with her own body, rubbing his frozen hands, and talking to him the entire time. "You don't get to die out here, Ethan Hale," she commanded. "You don't get to leave me alone. You made a promise. So you fight. You hear me? You fight to come back to me." When the men returned with a sled, they carefully began the long, slow journey home. At the house, they stripped his frozen clothes off and piled every blanket they had on top of him. Clara sat by his side, never letting go of his hand. Hours felt like days. His skin slowly went from icy to just cold. His breathing grew stronger, but he remained lost to the world. As the sun came up, Clara, exhausted and terrified, finally broke down. "You promised you'd fight for us," she whispered to his still form. "But the moment you had to trust me, you ran right back to your old ways. You chose those cattle over our life together." Her voice cracked, and the tears she had held back all night finally fell. "And now you might die, and I won't even get the chance to tell you how angry I am. How much you hurt me." She laid her head on the bed beside him and wept, not knowing if he would ever wake up to hear her. She was crying softly beside him when she felt a faint touch on her hair. "Clara." The word was a weak whisper, but it made her head shoot up. Ethan's eyes were open. "You are awake," she breathed, overwhelmed with relief. "You almost died, Ethan." "I am sorry," he rasped, his grip on her hand surprisingly tight. "I need to say this now. I was so afraid of losing you that I pushed you away. I kept up my walls just like I promised I would not." His voice grew a little stronger. "Out there, when I thought I was dying, all I could think about was how stupid I had been. I let my fear waste the time we had. My very last thought was that I had failed you." "You know, sometimes a man is his own worst enemy. That was the hard lesson my husband Ethan had to learn when he nearly died in a blizzard, all because he was running from the fear of loving me. His stubborn pride almost left me a widow. But what came next showed us both that the only cure for fear is a love that's tougher than any Texas winter. Stay with me to hear how we found our way back." Clara's voice was firm, cutting through her tears. "This is your last chance, Ethan. I can't live my life wondering when you'll push me away again. You have to be all in. No more walls." Ethan's own eyes were filled with regret. "I know," he whispered. "I promise. I will spend the rest of my days proving that I choose you, that I'm not afraid anymore." "You don't have to stop being afraid," Clara told him softly. "You just have to be afraid and choose me anyway." "I do," Ethan said, his voice finally clear. "I choose you, Clara. Always." He finally slept, a deep and healing sleep. And Clara let herself believe they would make it. She understood that love meant choosing each other, especially when things were broken and terrifying. Ethan had learned that love was not the danger. Fear was. And the only way to beat fear was to love without holding back. His recovery would be long. He had to heal from the cold that nearly took him, and from the old wounds that drove him into that storm. But Clara would be right there beside him. She had chosen Ethan Hale, a stubborn man learning how to love, and she would keep on choosing him. That is what a real partnership is all about. For a man who prided himself on his own two hands, being stuck in bed was a special kind of misery. His fingers and toes had frostbite, and his lungs burned from the frozen air. Worse than all that, he had to depend on Clara for every little thing. For the first few days, she cared for him with a quiet, simmering anger just beneath the surface. The warmth between them was gone. On the 5th day, when he was strong enough to sit up on his own, she finally let it out. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "You almost died, Ethan. You almost made me a widow after only 6 months because you were too proud to listen." He could only whisper, "I know." Her voice cracked with pain. "Do you? Do you have any idea what that was like for me? Searching in the dark, not knowing if I would find you alive or dead? Wrapped my body around yours to keep you warm, praying I wouldn't lose you? Tears streamed down her face. Don't you dare say you are sorry, she said, her voice hard as iron. I want to know why. Why you would risk everything we have for cattle that could have waited. Why you would rather die alone in the snow than admit you need me. The questions hit him harder than the fall. Because I was terrified, he finally said, his voice raspy. I learned a long time ago that the only way to not get hurt is to never let anyone get close. But I am not leaving, Clara whispered. I know, Ethan said, touching his heart. But a part of me is still a scared kid who believes dependent on folks just means pain. So when that fear gets too strong, I pull back. I do stupid, reckless things to feel like I am in control, even if those things get you killed. I reckon I wasn't thinking that far ahead, he admitted. I was just focused on being the tough rancher who handles everything alone, so I wouldn't have to face how scared I am of losing you. Clara was quiet for a long moment. That is the most honest thing you have ever told me. When I was out there in the snow, Ethan continued, my last thought was that I had wasted so much time being afraid. I see now that by trying to dodge a pain that might happen someday, I was causing a real one for both of us, right here and now. So, what is different? She asked. I finally understand. The one thing I was most afraid of, losing you, was exactly what I was causing. If I had died out there, it would have been my own fear that killed me and destroyed us. I do not want to live like that anymore, Clara. You scared me half to death, she whispered. We are both afraid, Ethan. I am scared I am not good enough for this life, that you will wake up and realize you married a city woman. But I choose you anyway. That is what I need from you, to choose me over the fear. I do choose you, Ethan said, his voice firm. I will choose you every single day, and when I start pulling back, you call me on it. Do not let me hide. I can do that, she said. But you have to promise me you will value your life as much as I do. No more foolish risks to prove a point. I cannot live wondering if every time you ride out is the last time I will see you. I promise, Ethan said without a second of hesitation. No more foolish risks. No more putting cattle before my own safety. From now on, we make the big decisions together. Clara nodded, and some of the tightness in her shoulders finally let go. We will get through this, she said, leaning in to kiss him with forgiveness and hope. In the weeks that followed, Ethan worked hard to be the partner she deserved. He shared his worries instead of burying them. When the old habit of pulling away crept in, he remembered the cold of the snow and chose to move closer instead. Clara saw the change and met it with a deeper trust of her own, sharing her own fears about this hard life. They learned to hold each other's worries without trying to fix them. Spring finally came, melting the last of the snow. As they walked the property, they saw they had lost fewer cattle than they'd feared, thanks to the plans Clara had insisted on. We ought to expand, Clara said, pointing to an eastern pasture. If we run a fence and a water line, we could graze another 50 head out here. That is a bold plan, Ethan said with a smile, but I like it. They spent an hour making plans, their ideas fitting together like two sides of a coin, building something bigger than either of them could have alone. It was the kind of partnership he had once thought was impossible. Back at the house, Ethan looked out over the land that had once been his whole world. I thought this ranch was everything, he said quietly. I figured if I could make it work alone, that would prove I was strong. And now? Clara asked. Now I realized the ranch was just a way to hide from being lonely. He turned to her. You showed me that partnership is not weakness and that loving someone is the bravest thing a man can do. You changed me too, she said. I learned that choosing to need someone is a sight stronger than going it alone. We are quite a pair, Ethan said with a small smile. The best partnerships are forged in fire, Clara said. And we have been through ours. That night, with Clara resting against his side, Ethan thought about their journey. What started as a business deal to save his land had turned into everything. She was his partner, his best friend, the one person who saw past his walls, the woman who had literally saved his life. "Clara," he said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me, for saving my life in every way that matters." She looked up at him in the moonlight. "You saved mine too, you know. I was lost when I came here. You gave me a home and a reason to believe in myself again." "So we saved each other," Ethan said. "We did," Clara agreed. "And we'll just keep on saving each other, day after day." It's amazing how a partnership born from desperation can become the strongest bond there is. After their shaky start, Ethan and Clara didn't just save Iron Creek Ranch, they made it thrive. With her head for numbers and his feel for the land, they created a powerhouse. They expanded slowly, adding land and cattle at a pace they could manage. Before long, the ranch was a beacon of success, employing 8 full-time hands. But their greatest venture wasn't the 400 head of cattle. It was the family they were starting. When Clara told Ethan she was pregnant, his heart soared with joy and sank with terror. Loving someone new meant risking a new kind of loss. But this time, instead of pulling away, he pulled her closer. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Clara said one evening, her hand on the gentle curve of her belly. Ethan was not so sure. "My own father was hardly a role model," he admitted. Clara just smiled. "But you know how to love. You show up, you work hard, and you know how to be brave and vulnerable all at once. That's all that matters." He placed his hand over hers, feeling the life they had made. "I'm still scared," he whispered. "Me too," she said. "But being scared together makes all the difference." Their daughter, Sarah, arrived in the spring, a perfect little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's dark hair. The moment Ethan held her, his world shifted. This tiny, trusting person required a love so complete there was no room for walls or fear. It demanded total surrender. And for the first time, Ethan gave it without hesitation. The years brought more joy and more children. A son, James, came along 2 years after Sarah, followed by twin girls, Emma and Grace. Fatherhood was the hardest and best thing Ethan had ever done. The old fear of loss would bubble up with every scraped knee, but Clara was always his steady hand, his calm in the storm. She reminded him that love means letting go just as much as holding on. He taught the children to ride and respect the land. Clara taught them to read and think for themselves. Together they raised a family that was both strong and kind. 15 years after that tense day in the Reverend's office, Ethan stood on his porch. He watched his children playing, their laughter filling the air. Clara was in her garden, which had grown to feed not just their family, but their neighbors too. He had found his peace, not by avoiding risk, but by embracing it with the woman he loved. Clara snuggled up beside him, a comfortable habit after all their years. He looked at her, now 41, and saw more beauty than he had when she was 26. "What's on your mind, Ethan?" she asked. "Just how wrong a man can be," he said. "I used to think a man had to stand alone to be strong. I thought loving someone was a risk I couldn't afford." He pulled her closer. "I was so busy saving this land, I didn't see it was my own heart that was in trouble. You showed me that real strength isn't about carrying it all yourself, but about sharing the load." They watched their children play as the sun bled out across the 2,000 acres that was now their home. The Iron Creek Ranch was a success, but not because of the cattle or the money. Its real worth was in the family it held. "You ever regret it?" Ethan finally asked, a question 15 years in the making. "Leaving everything for this?" Clara looked him square in the eye. "Not for a second, Ethan. This life, this family, it's more than I ever dared to hope for. The hard times just proved we were real. Anyone can stick together when it's easy. We made it through the impossible." He gave her a long, deep kiss, full of the 15 years they had built together. Their daughter, Sarah, hollered from the yard, "Y'all are embarrassing." Ethan just grinned and called back, "That's my job." He looked around at the ranch that had once been his whole world. It was still a fine piece of land, but it wasn't the most important thing anymore. The woman next to him and the children they raised had taken that spot. They were proof that love was a damn sight stronger than fear. It was the biggest joke the world had ever played on him. The judge said, "Marry or lose the ranch." He married to save the dirt beneath his feet. But in the end, it was never about the land. Clara saved him from a lonely life. She walked onto his porch as a problem the law made him solve, and she walked away with his whole heart. In return, he gave her a home and the promise that she'd always be valued for exactly who she was. A man set out to protect his land and ended up saving his own soul. A woman came looking for independence and found the truest partner a person could ask for. Their story wasn't about a perfect start. It was about two stubborn, scared people who found the courage to choose each other day after day. That was the real legacy of the Iron Creek Ranch. Not the fences or the fields, but the simple proof that love, real love, is worth any risk. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.